Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Kent, and I'm joining Chris Bean. Hello, Mr. Bean.
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to be talking about testing your students. Before we talk about testing your students, it's important to talk about preparing for those tests, because when we get to those testing times, we don't want to be unprepared or not have the material / systems in place to help us as the testing process ensues. So we're going to make sure we're prepared for our tests. Getting ready for your test should start with a checklist. You will want to include everything you need to run a successful test in that checklist. I'll kind of go over a checklist that we use here at our studio, and then we can kind of break down the different parts of it and talk about what that means. And again, this is just our system and the checklist that we use. You might need extra things, you might need less things, you might need different things, but it's something that you can decide for yourself and figure out how to best set yourself up for success when it comes to your testing. So a normal checklist for us in preparing for our test kind of looks like this. We want to check our belt inventory. We want to print belt labels. We want to order belts, order trophies. We want to order boards and bricks for breaking. And then lastly, we want to print our scoring sheets. So Mr. Bean, can you kind of walk us through some of these points in this checklist and why it's important to have them set up for us?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so like you said, our checklist is going to differ depending on the school that you have. And for us, we start with the belt inventory. With this, we've ran previous tests, and so we have extra belts. We always try to order a few extra every couple times. If it happens that we order the incorrect size or incorrect color for somebody, of course, we have those extra ones on stock. And so we want to kind of check what we have in stock so that when it comes time to order, we're not ordering extra and then we have just, a heaping pile of belts all the time, which is not always necessary to have. Every once in a while, have a few extras are fine. Those are definitely come in handy from time to time, but it's not necessary, I don't think, to have, 10 of each color and size on hand all the time.
Yeah, personally, I realize this is a very small detail, but if you have a place that you can organize those extra belts and kind of set them out on display, it does kind of look really cool when you got like a whole stack of different colored belts, and it looks kind of cool. So again, that's not a useful type thing, more of an aesthetic type thing, but I think it's cool that we have a handful of extra belts in some cubbies, and you can see them, and I think it looks pretty sweet.
Yeah, and in that situation for us anyways, we have that, we kind of have a counter, it's hard to describe.
Open face cabinet.
Yeah, we have open face cabinets, and in those we have the belts, and they're kind of in there by rank, and so the students kind of visually can say, oh, hey, I'm at this belt, so this next color is going to be my next belt, and they can kind of count, okay, I got 5 more belts until I get black belt, which is kind of just something kind of extra, like you talked about. Not necessary, not at all, but that is something we have, and I know I can see sometimes the students thinking and calculating, okay, we got 5 more belts, and then it's going to be this long, and okay, that's when I get my black belt, which is kind of cool for them to go through those steps.
And a big point of that too, which is just common sense, I think, we have the space for it. So if you're in a smaller room or you don't have somewhere you can put that, don't just buy a bunch of belts and stack them on the floor or something. We have that counter space or that cabinet space. We're able to kind of display those, but then to the more important side of it, actually have them on hand for when it comes time for these belt tests.
Yes, sir. So again, with that, of course, you want to cross-reference what you have before you go to order or figure out what you need to order. So once you have your inventory, what you have on stock in hand, then you need to somehow get the labels or segment each student a belt and set aside that student their belt so that you're not giving the same student you're not giving 2 students the same belt, because of course that would end poorly. So for us, what we have is we have a student client system that tracks the student's progress, and in there we have of course their belts in there and their belt ranks, and in the system we can pretty well click a button and it says, okay, this student is a red belt, they're going to go to a red belt with a white stripe next. Here's a list of sizes you need, here's the list of names, and print this, and we have them print up on mailing address labels, and we just put those. It says, okay, this Johnny is a going to be a size 4 red belt with a white stripe. Okay, size 4 red with a white, boom. And then I put that aside and go through the whole list for everybody for that. Then from there, you'll know what belts you need to order, right? Because if you have a student that is still on the label paper that doesn't have a belt yet, you need to order them. So the next step in the process is order your belts. And of course, you want to have enough lead time for this so that you can make sure you get the belts in by the time testing happens, right? So you figure out when this part of the checklist has to be done. Really, these 3 steps: your belt inventory, printing your belt labels or making your belt labels, or somehow going through that process, and then ordering your belts. If you need trophies or breaks or boards for breaking, that's an ordering process. Of course, you have to calculate that into your shipping time or whatever it is. So kind of have that filtered out, have that figured out. What are you going to do? How is that process going to go? For trophies, for us, we like to give out a best testing candidate trophy. And so that is pretty well self-explanatory, but on each test, so we have the beginner's test, and there's 4 belt groups in there, and during the course of the test, the instructors, of course, are watching for the students to be performing the moves correctly, if they're going to pass or if they're not going to pass, and what that process is going to be like on the back end, but then also who performed best today. And at the end of the test, I turn to them, hey, who do you think did the best? Who do you think did the best? Okay, and then we get 2 or 3 different names, and you know what, this guy actually did pretty good. Or no, she actually, you know what, I think she won. Let's give her the trophy. Boom. So then we give that, after we do all the belts, then we go through and say, hey, all right, now it's time for the best testing candidate. So this person performed the best overall. Everybody did an awesome job, but this person did the best overall. They were just on fire out there today. And so, Sally, come on down. Let's give her the trophy. Give her a hand. And everybody, of course, that's a big deal for everybody. And as a side note, when the test starts, I like to put out the trophy. It says best testing candidate. I put the trophy out right in we have a table that we sit on for the testing. I put it right in the middle, the very front edge of it. So it's like we start, boom, they can see, oh, look at that, right? I got to perform the best I can, so I want to get that trophy. And of course, only one person gets a trophy. That's the best testing candidate. Not okay, here's a trophy for everybody, here's a medal for one person gets it for us. Do you think there's some benefits to having a best testing candidate on the test, or that kind of system in place?
Yes, sir.
What do you think that brings out for the students? So if it's the first time that we did that, we gave out a best testing candidate trophy. We explained it a little bit at the end. Maybe we did at the beginning as well. I actually don't remember. But on the subsequent tests, what do you think that does for the students to have that system in place?
Well, it gives them something to work toward, or a goal to achieve. So when they're on that test, not only are they trying to pass that test, but they're trying to also perform to the absolute best of their ability so that they can win that best testing candidate trophy. I think a mix of that is for themselves to know they did a good job and be able to earn that trophy, but then it kind of helps to raise the level of the entire class, because in that small scale they are competing against each other, so they're trying to do better than each other in order to win that trophy. And as we talked about healthy competition before, it's not always an aggressive thing of, hey, I have to win so that I can be the best, even though it is the best testing candidate trophy for that day. It's just an extra motivator to perform well and to do a good job. And again, if everyone's trying to do that, then the whole group is going to be raised to another level.
Yeah, and as the owner, as the instructor, that's not a very difficult thing to implement. The trophies are very inexpensive, and I think the benefit that comes out of that best testing candidate trophy is far outweighs the small price to pay for those trophies on the front end. Yeah. So again, if you have to order those, you need to figure out how many tests you can have, how many trophies do you need to have on stock, and perhaps you go through at the beginning of the year. Okay, these are the tests I'm going to do for the year. Boom, order them so they're all set, and then that's a yearly thing. However you want to do that, but have those accounted for if that's something you want to implement. For the belts, or sorry, for the boards and for the bricks. If you have board breaking or brick breaking at your test, of course, you need to account for that and how and when and what size and shape and whatever you have to do. Like if you break tiles, or if you break 1-inch boards or half-inch boards, or if you have whatever the brick is, or whatever, of course, you know those different things, and you have to account for those. And do you need to go buy those? Is that something you have delivered to you? Do you have a company that you just contact and they get it to you? Whatever it is. But again, understand that there are things that need to be set up for your test. And in order to have a test that runs as smoothly as possible, those things need to be set up and in place before the test starts. So have the forethought to think about this systematically and set up the steps to take in order to have everything in place when it comes time for testing. And as a side note, as far as the belts go, from time to time, of course, it happens to us. It's going to happen to you if it hasn't already. Message me, because I want to know your system, your process for this. But on belt testing day, inevitably, there's going to be a kid that shows up that doesn't have a belt, or has the incorrect size belt, or has the wrong color belt. Having a idea or system, some protocol to follow for if and when that happens, definitely is important. And one way that we go about that is, okay, we have Jackson in class. Man, you know what? Jackson is a red belt. I already have a red belt for him. I'm looking, man, I don't have any more. I don't have any extra red with the whites. Okay, so then we need to let Jackson know that he's not going to get a belt on that day. Not because he's in trouble or he didn't pass or anything like that, but just we messed up. We dropped the ball. I don't have a belt for him. But we also have to let the parent know that, so that at the end of the test, they know that, hey, oh man, why he got called up there? Because they said, where's his belt at? What's going on? So letting the parents know, and then letting the student know ahead of time before the end of the test is important. Which means when the test is about to start, or as the test is starting, you need to have the belts kind of set out on the table or on the floor, on a counter, or whatever, set out in such a way that you know, okay, all right, this person's here, this person's here, this person's here, and everything's kind of set out and ready. And in that process, we'll tell you, hey, if you have a belt, if you don't have a belt, and what the size and color for that is. Now, as far as letting the student and then the parents know, Master Kent, who do you think should be told first on that?
I would probably tell the parent first, and then do let the student know before you get to the actual part where they come up and they stand up there, and then you say, oh, just kidding, I don't have a belt for you. But in that case, I would let the parent know first that they have an understanding of what's happening. So then when they see me go walk over and talk to their kid, depending on how that kid reacts, the parent will know, what's happening. Because I don't know how that kid's going to react. They could be totally cool with it. They could break down and cry and be upset. They could be angry. So it just depends on how they will handle it. So usually I would let the parent know first, so that they have an idea what's going on. Then before the test starts, or soon into the test, as soon as you realize you don't have that belt, let the student know, not at the very end when they should be getting their belt. That way they kind of have time to prepare themselves mentally and, have an understanding of what's going to happen. And again, like you said, not that they did anything wrong, not that they didn't pass. We just don't physically have a belt for them. So, and an important part of that too, like you said, is even if you don't have their belt, don't let them sit down. Because, as we do our tests, they sit down and we call them up one by one. They bow, we take their old belt off, put their new belt on, or whatever it is. They bow in front of everybody so everyone can see them as they're awarded their new belts. So you don't want to skip that step, even if you don't have a belt. Still have them come up, still have them bow, shake their hand. At that point then, I would let everyone know what's happening. That way everyone else in the class doesn't think, hey, what's up with Sally? Sally didn't get a belt today. So parent, student, everyone else, I think is the best or most efficient way to deal with that situation.
Yes, sir. Next is a score sheet. Now, before we get into score sheets, I actually would like to hear from you guys on how you run your test. What do you do for score sheets at your test? Do you use them Do you use them for some of your tests? Do you not use them at all? And maybe some feedback on score sheets as it relates and the kind of the setup and system and process that we use for that. So YouTube is the best way for that. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you use and how you think about and interact with score sheets on your test. For us, we use score sheets for the upper end tests. So in the black belt testing process and above, we use score sheets. Below that, from time to time, we will have a sheet of paper that we might take some notes on during the test, not necessarily a score sheet, just kind of jotting down notes and how they pertain to the students. And in fact, in the next episode, we're going to go through what to do with those notes. But score sheets can be done in a few ways. You can use the score sheets just for your reference, so you kind of have an idea of what to follow and what to, more or less as a checklist. Hey, did we do this yet? Did we do this yet? You can kind of check it off as you go. Or you can choose to give the students those score sheets after the test, almost like a report card. You give, they did a low block. Okay, give them a score. They got a 5. Give them or maybe they did a low block and you give them a B minus. Whatever the scoring system is, but you do all that and then you give that to them after the test, and then they have a report card from their test. And then what that does is for the student, they can see, okay, well, I did pretty good on all of these things. I didn't do so great on that. And so maybe they make a private lesson, or maybe they watch some videos, or whatever it is, whatever your system or process is. But then they know what they need to work on so they can improve for the next test. Having some form of a scoring system is a great tool to implement if you don't already have that. It will allow you to have a firm basis on who should pass and who should fail their test. And not only for you, so you have ground to stand on, but you can, of course, and should be referencing those or giving those to the students when you tell them, hey, listen, you didn't pass because of this. And look, I took notes, and I can tell you all those things, and this is what I saw you do. Instead of trying to remember it verbatim, you're okay, they messed this up, they did this, and they did this, and then you tell them, hey, listen, this is what happened. This is what I saw. This is how you did it on the test, and these are the things you need to work on to improve and try to pass for the next go-round. If you choose to use a scoring sheet, again, you can use this as a report card where you give it to the students, but you don't have to. This can be something that gets filed away in their file. It could be scanned and then put into their client profile, whatever, or they're just thrown away at the end. Use it. Okay, listen, these people all passed. Great, done with those. You can give it to them. You can put it somewhere with their other things that you have for them. Don't have to. You don't even have to do a scoring system. As I was saying, we do this for the upper belts. And for us, one of the major reasons we do that for the upper belts is as they test for their black belt, one, there's a lot of different things they have to do. Two, for black belt, we want that to be a milestone. And as such, being a milestone, one to be not easier, one to be a tougher, more challenging than all the tests that came before it, because it is, and it should be. And so having that in place, they're the students in front of us, and okay, do a low block. Let's see. And of course, we call it in Korean because we do a Korean style. Okay, boom. All right, next side. All right, and then we go through the whole thing like that. And as they're going through their moves, we're taking notes and okay, all right. And of course, that is incredibly nerve-wracking to be on the other side of that clipboard or tablet or whatever you're using. That adds another layer to the belt test. On top of that, because, again, for us, black belt, we want that to be a big milestone. Black belt is a bigger milestone. And because of that, people make it to that test. And for us, there's 4 tests that they have to go through in order to be on the other side. So they have 3 pre-tests, and those 3 pre-tests are broken down. They do basically a quarter of their material. Not a quarter, a third of their material, because there's 3. Not math teachers. They do a third of their material on each of those, and then at the real test, they do all of that stuff again, and they're graded on all of those things each time. And they have to make it and pass the first pretest before they can make it to the second pretest, and pass that to go to the third pretest, and pass that to go to the real black belt test. Now, because of that's a lot of extra.
I was just going to say that might seem excessive, having 4 different tests, but if you think about it, that's exactly what a stripe test is. During the other belts, during their color belt levels, they have to pass a certain number of stripe tests before they make it to their belt test. And this is just as you said, it's a bigger milestone. So this is a bigger version of those small incremental tests before that one larger test at the end. So it's not like we're just trying to overload them with tests and test them super hard. It is a more intense and more strenuous type of testing, but in theory, it's the same idea as a stripe test, and where you have to pre-qualify so we know that you can do these certain things before you get to the actual black belt test, and all those things kind of happen together. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there before, because it might seem like, why the heck is there so many tests? But it's the same idea that goes into a stripe testing type of system.
Just on a grander scale.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And in that grander scale, of course, like as a stripe test, good. Thanks for that. That helps as my explaining process goes.
My brain works sometimes.
Good. In those stripe tests, of course, we have students go to or try to get that stripe, that small incremental test, and they don't pass. And then they have to go and try that again. And so in those pre-tests, there's times people show up to the pre-test and they're not quite ready for the black belt test. And so they don't pass. And of course, as I'm going through testing them and writing out those things, it's clear to see who passes and who doesn't. And on those type of tests, it is, I think, very important to have that type of handwritten or typed up or whatever version of a score sheet, so that when the time comes for you to tell Sally or Jonathan or whoever, hey, you passed, hey, you didn't pass, and it's because of this, or hey, you passed, however, you do still have some things to work on. So here's your list of things you need to work on, because if you go to the second pretest and you do the second, third, and you go, by the time you get to the real black belt test, if you have 5% and then 5% and 5% from each of those third things, that's 15% of their tests they're going to do wrong. That's not going to look so good for them. So giving those things, hey, here you go. Before you move to the next step, work on these things. Here you go. Before you move to the next step, work on these. And that is a fabulous tool from what I think we found, so that by the time they make it to the actual black belt test, they have an idea, a mindset of, one, what we're looking for, but then two, I think a firm understanding of how and the way to do those things, so that they make it to that test and they can pass, and we're not setting our students up for failure.
Like you said, whether or not you choose to give it to the student and let them move forward to practice the things that they need to work on or whatnot, it's better to have it and need it than not need it and have it. So, if we use these score sheets and take notes, and at the end of the test we decide we don't want them, we can throw them away. Or if we have someone we need to talk to, we have that documentation of, hey, during your test, I wrote this stuff down. Like, this happened. You need to go work on it. That way, it's all written down, it's documented. If we want to, we can give it to them, we can put it in their file, or if we don't need it, we can get rid of it. And like you said, it's report card style. It's written down, I give it to them, they can go home and they can practice it. But on top of that, they can bring it back to us, and if an instructor needs to work with them on something and they weren't present at that test, I don't have to go find that instructor that ran that test and say, hey, do you remember 2 weeks ago on this test when this person made this mistake? What was it? And of course, I don't know about you, but I don't have a great memory, so I'm not going to remember what it is. But we have that report card. Oh, here, move number 39. Oh, it's a front kick. Oh, well, you did this wrong in your front kick, because I can see by the notes that you did this instead of this. So that's a great tool, not only for the student to be able to practice, but then it helps us, because we don't have to think back, and we can have a better documentation of what needs to be corrected and what needs to be worked on as they prepare and move forward in that testing process.
Yeah, I think that's a big point, is as we have those, the students, they made a mistake, they need to fix or improve or change this thing, having that physical copy of that paper or that scanned document or whatever it is, that you can go back and give that to another instructor to say, hey, listen, this is my notes from my test. Please help me. And they can look at that and say, oh, okay, yep. And then, of course, they can watch and hopefully understand and agree with what is written down, and they can improve those things. So having that set up so the student can make a lesson, a one-on-one lesson to improve those things is incredibly beneficial to your students. Incredibly beneficial, yes.
Yeah, and as you said, to stress that point of those small issues building up. Because like you said, if it's a 5% of the first pretest combined with 5% of the second pretest combined with 5% of the third pretest, when you get to the ultimate test, the black belt test, that's a 15% margin of error that could have been easily corrected, because it goes one of two ways, where you think, oh yeah, I did a little bit bad, but it's fine, I passed, don't worry about it. And again, it just adds up. So even if it's a small thing, being able to work on that and take care of that moving forward is going to be very important leading up to that big test and just their training in general. So even if it is a small thing, make sure you not stop it, but you correct it and fix that before it grows into a bigger problem. So having this again is just, it's going to make the student better. It's going to make the process better, and it's going to make us work better as a team as we try to raise the level of the quality of our students, especially at that point that we're talking about toward closer to the black belt level.
Yes, sir. And having, those score sheets at the test is going to be a huge tool when it comes time for you to decide who got the best testing candidate, who gets that trophy. You can look at the report cards. Okay, clear winner is this guy. Easy, right? Then it's not, I think this guy did, I think this. If you look at boop, okay, easy, no problem. And so that's just another tool to have in your arsenal to help with that testing process. Now, if you're going to use a score sheet on test, that means your test perhaps will be extended. It'll be longer than normal. So instead of you just saying, okay, do this or do this or do this, you ask them to do those things, and then you need to take notes on them. Okay, do this, and then you're taking notes on them. Now, of course, that can be helped or corrected with using some shorthand on the score sheet, and that's what we do. For us, we have kind of three areas of shorthand that we use. If it's an actual mistake, if they did an incorrect move, then we have to write that in. But if it falls into intensity, stances, or correct movement, we have a shorthand that goes with that. And so if they lacked intensity, we give them a plus sign. If they didn't have good stances or their footwork was somehow incorrect, we give them a less than or greater than sign. If it's an incorrect movement, we give them a minus sign. And if we give them a minus sign, then somewhere we need to write what that incorrect movement is, but that's just a quick, okay, we know, okay, so somewhere in there they had an incorrect movement. Go find, okay, number 42, okay, that's where the incorrect movement was, that's what it was, okay, great. For us, we do this on a 5-point scale, and so 5 is like stellar. If they lacked intensity, that's a 1-point decrease. If they didn't have great stances, that's a 1-point increase, decrease. If they did an incorrect movement because of the differences in severity of that could be a 1 or a 2-point decrease. And if they just were, you understand, I'm sure I don't have to necessarily explain this, but again, if they did an incorrect movement, it could be a small incorrect movement, it could be a big incorrect movement, it could be a lot of moves, it could be just a few moves, and so that would bring them down in that scale. And with that, so if they start out at a 5, and I would be more apt to start people at a 4, and then if they did stellar, if they had that extra something, then that would be the 5 on most of the tests. So as you're going through that 5-point scale, have a cutoff. So if they get a 3 or below or a 2 or below, then they don't pass. And it should be pretty easy to tell on those moves, or maybe you add everything up, you divide it out, okay, you give them an overall score based on the numbers that they got, and if it's a 2 or 3 or below, then they don't pass. For us, it's a 3 or below, they don't pass. So they need to be 3 or below?
I think it's below 3.
Below 3.
3 is the average.
3. Yeah, okay, so right, yeah. So if they get a 3, that's an average score. If it's a 4, it's a little bit above average. 5 again is stellar. But if they get a score below 3, then at that point they don't pass. And again, it's pretty clear to see. And not only is it clear to see that they didn't pass, but it's also clear to see a roadmap for what they need to do to pass. And because they have that paper or they have that document or whatever it is, they have that to look at, to use as a reference, as a guide, to get them to where they need to be so they can pass those things.
Yeah, and as you mentioned at the beginning, there's a couple different ways you can use these scoring sheets, and you kind of brushed over it a little toward the middle here too, but I just wanted to stress the importance of when it's important to use a different method. So, for example, if you have a large class and you're working through your testing, you probably won't want to do the report card type of method where you're taking lots of notes and you're doing individual grades and you're doing a lot of writing, because maybe it takes 5 seconds to make a note. Well, if you have 40 students, you have to multiply that 5 seconds times 40, and it's an excessive amount of time. It's not gonna help you get through that test and keep on schedule with your classes for that night. So if it's a bigger test or you just don't have the staff for that test to be able to cover those notes adequately, then maybe just treat it more as a passing thing. So something that I do with the bigger test is I'll have some score sheets out, if you will, and rather than writing down a number every single time or making a note on all the things, I only make notes on the bad things, or only make notes on the things that need correction. So that way I'm not, taking the time to say, okay, that move was a 4, that move was a 4, that move was a 5, that move was a 3. If it's a 1 or 2, I'll stop and take a note, but that cuts down, maybe I make 1 note out of every 10 moves rather than making those 10 different notes. But, if you have a smaller test, or you have, a test that's open-ended, meaning it starts at this time and then we'll get done when we get done. It's not necessarily a hour-long or 45-minute-long class. You have the more time to make those notes and kind of get more granular on that. So, you can decide for the situation or just in general how you want to use those scoring sheets. But, not even that you have to have one in the first place, but if you do, there's so many options and also so many benefits, and it is a flexible type thing. So I think it's just important to talk about. We're not saying that in a class of 50 people, you have to take the time to make individual notes for all 50 of those people. That's ridiculous. That's us trying to stop you from being efficient and effective, which is one of our goals. So, it's a tool that can be used in many different ways, and you have to decide how to best use it for each situation.
Your tests should not be a surprise to the students. They should know when they're going to be tested and what material they're going to be tested over. No one likes pop quizzes. Now, that's not to say you can't give them pop quizzes, but I don't think you should do a pop quiz as a belt test. To do a pop quiz and just quiz them over the material, hey, are you ready? Are you in line? Do you know this stuff? Great. Absolutely do that all the time. Well, maybe not all the time. It would lose its importance, but do that. But don't make a belt test. Don't come into class and say, okay, guys, we're going to do a belt test today. We're going to do a belt test today? No, what are we testing over? I don't even know my stuff. Can't do that. Please don't do that. For your students' sake, do not give a pop quiz belt test.
We're not anti-pop quiz. Just make sure that the consequences
are not as
pop quiz are not
as big
make
as
or break
failing a belt test.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, right. Your students, again, need to know exactly what they're going to be tested over. A way you can do that is have a curriculum. In that curriculum, it lays out, okay, if they're this belt, they're going to test over these things. And then at the test them over those things. If you cover extra information in your class, wonderful. Kudos to you. Just don't require that for belt testing. Or if you cover that information enough at that belt level, add that to the curriculum, add that to the lesson plan, and then test them over it. Otherwise, have that as fun, cool, exciting, extra stuff that you do in class that you don't necessarily have to test on.
One thing I do is, or one rule I like to follow is to over-prepare them and under-test them. So when someone asks about a test or we're preparing for the test, I just tell them anything that we have done in class, you can be tested over. And then whether or not we do it, at least they're prepared mentally, or hopefully they have also practiced that material so that they can pass that test over anything that we've done. And if we do something extra or fun that I know for a fact is not going to be on the test, so let's say we work on a complicated set of moves and we only do it for 7 minutes. I preface that drill by saying, hey, just so you know, this won't be on your test, or this is just for fun, or I just wanted to do this because we had extra time. If you know for a fact you're not going to test them over that, kind of let them know, hey, it's not make or break if you know this. You don't have to go home and drill it 100 times to get it right. So if you have those extra fun drills, maybe you can kind of throw that out there to start with. But like I said, for students that ask about testing, I just straight up tell them anything that we've done in class, I can test you on. So that way it's kind of all-encompassing. But then let's say we cover 10 different topics. I might only test them on 7. Well, it's better to be prepared for the whole 10 than just the 7, because maybe you did the wrong 7, or maybe you missed one by accident here or there. So that's just kind of a rule I follow for that test.
Yeah, and in that process, in that idea, in that mindset, isn't it interesting? I find it absolutely fascinating how we'll tell students, hey, listen, you have to know this because we're going to test over this. And we drill it like a zillion times in class, and it's not a very hard move, but we get to belt testing, and sometimes they still struggle with it. However, we do a move that's awfully complicated for 5 minutes in one class 8 months ago. Never do it again. I can ask that, hey, John, do you remember that? Yeah, absolutely. Boom, he does it. Isn't it interesting how they can somehow easily remember and recall information that doesn't pertain to their belt testing, and never practicing it and never doing it again, but it's so complicated, so much more challenging than the level that they're at, but they can recall it as if it's nothing, but the information that they actually have to test on somehow is like pulling teeth sometime to get them to remember and review and rehearse and do so they can do at their belt test?
I think all instructors can relate to that. Yes, sir.
You found that over your time as well, right?
Once or twice. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
I chalk it up to some of that extra stuff being more exciting or more fun or cooler, for lack of a better word. And that's where you can kind of implement drills to help them see the stuff that you are doing, the ways it can be applied, and the ways that it can also be cool, even if it's the mundane and routine thing they're doing all the time. And then that's another part of it too is, we do our core hand and foot techniques, if not every class, at least once a week. So that becomes boring and routine after a certain point in time. When you do that one drill, the complicated move one time, that's that rarity. That's that gem among all the stones, so to speak. So that's one justification or reason I think that happens like that. But I would agree. It does happen, and it is very frustrating. But I mean, you just gotta laugh. What else are you gonna do? Just laugh and get back to work.
Yes. So we covered pre-qualifiers a little bit already, but essentially, if we have a belt test, they're going to test over, let's say, hand techniques, foot techniques, forms, and self-defense. And so, in the course of that testing process, when it comes time pretty close to belt testing, we have them qualify over their hand techniques, foot techniques, forms, and self-defense. And we tell them, hey, listen, next class we're going to stripe test. We call it stripe test, and that's because at the end of, if they pass, we give them a color stripe on their belt, and each color signifies a different section of their information. If they pass all of those sections, if they get all of their stripes, then they're eligible to go through their belt testing. At the belt test, they do all those things again, but they can look down at their belt. Hey, yep, I did these just a week and a half ago. I should be fine for my belt test. They should feel confident and prepared for it. And if they don't have those, it's kind of like our notes telling another instructor, hey, listen, they don't have a red stripe on their belt. They make a private lesson. Hey, I need my red stripe. Okay, that's for hand techniques. Let's do your hand techniques. And then they get to do that. Again, it's not necessarily a report card at that point, but it is definitely a signal, like a pretty clear color-coordinated signal that says, hey, you're missing an orange stripe. Okay, we got to do your forms. No problem. Let's see what you got. And then they test them over those things. If they pass, great, they get the stripe. If not, then they don't. And they have to continue to try again. And again, we use that as a pre-qualifier so that when they go to the belt test, both the students and the instructors know that, hey, everybody at least in a relatively short window ago could do all these moves. So this should just be a rehashing, a retest of those things that you clearly you have the stripes for. You qualified on this stuff already. You should know. It should be easy for you. No problem.
We just finished up a few episodes talking about our developing our staff and working on our staff. And as we're talking about pre-qualifying and testing, I think it's important to mention that we need to all be on the same page as far as our standards, especially with these pre-qualifying tests leading into the belt test, in the sense that if one instructor has a lower standard for how things should be done and they award those pre-qualifying stripes to the students, and that student goes to the next instructor who has a higher standard for how those things should be done, that student's going to suffer by losing their stripe. Now, they're probably not going to suffer in terms of their techniques because we're requiring a higher level from them, so to speak, as long as it's reasonable. I guess my point is we can't. We've talked about being firm, holding the line, and being more flexible and kind of letting things go. But we need to have a certain point where, this technique has to be done to this level. You have to understand this technique to this level in order to earn the stripe. And if you don't, you don't. And speaking from experience, being a young instructor, it's hard to fail people. It's hard to come to those qualifying points in their training and say, hey, look, you didn't perform adequately. You don't get your stripe. We can work on it, but you're not going to be striped today, and then we can deal with the issue moving forward. But again, it's worse off for your students if you say, okay, that was good enough. Here's your stripe. They come to another instructor, or worse, they come to their test and they don't perform adequately. Either they get their stripe taken away beforehand, or they get to that test and they straight up fail their belt test. That's worse for them than to fail them the first time, while you have the time and ability to work on it leading up to that test to make it better, than it is to let it kind of come to that head at the test and again, make that bigger fail rather than that smaller kind of stop, correct, and then fix the issue. So just make sure that everybody is in agreement and understanding of the quality you want to, the quality you demand from your students, and understand that passing someone because you don't want to fail them is more detrimental to them than helping them correct their technique. That way it's done correctly. Even if it's the tougher thing to do, it's more beneficial for the student to make them better and then make all of us better, and then raise the standard of our school. And we talk a lot about having a student first mindset, and it might seem harsh to talk about failing a student, but we want them to become great martial artists. We want them to learn how to deal with adversity and deal with failure, and this is a great place to do it. And again, I think it's better to have them experience that on the smaller scale than let it slide by to that larger scale. I'd rather you fail a stripe test than fail a belt test, and I think most people would agree. So it's just important that we all are holding the same standard for our students, and not compromising that, and understanding that really that's beneficial for them and for us, even if it's tough to look at someone and tell them they failed in the first place.
And, with that, I would almost be more apt to make the pre-qualifiers, those stripe tests, more demanding, more challenging, held to a higher level than the belt test. Because if they don't pass that, they can try again the next day. They can try again in 2 days. It's not a, oh man, you don't get this, and now you can't try again for 3 months or for 6 months or whatever the time frame is. So holding them to a higher standard on those pre-qualifying moments will improve them, and it will lead them to have a higher quality when it comes time for them to do their belt test, because that's was expected of them at those other areas. And for us, the way that we run our tests is it's on a 3-month basis. So we do a belt test for the colored belts every 3 months. The way that's designed is the first month is where they attain and learn the information. The second month, they review, rehearse, and have maintenance on the material. The third month is where they go through their tests. That includes their pre-qualifiers, their stripe testing, and then their actual belt test. And then the next cycle comes in, they start all over again. First month is learn the information intake. Second month is review, rehearse, and retain their information. Third month is testing. And having that system in place or having a system like that in place will greatly benefit your students, so they have a path to follow by the time they get to belt testing. They've done all these other informations. They are set and prepared. They're at the top of the pyramid. They can test. Then they move into the next pyramid. They're at the top. They can test, and so on, all the way through their process.
Yeah, and like you said, it's doing it that way too, especially with that last month. It gives us a chance. If they do fail a stripe test, we have the time to work on the material, fix it, and get them that stripe before their actual belt test. And on top of that, as they're earning those stripes, it kind of boosts their confidence and gets them prepared for that belt test. Because the more stripes they get, the better they feel with their material, and the more confident they are for when it comes to that test. And I like how you said to make the stripe test harder than the actual test, because it kind of goes with the idea of over prepare and under test. If I can make the pre-qualifying tests harder than the actual test will be, when you get to the actual test, it's going to be a cakewalk. You're going to be probably more nervous thinking of it as a bigger event, but you've gone through something harder beforehand. This shouldn't be, not to say to make your tests easy, but if you make that pre-qualifying test harder, it's just going to prepare them better for that real test. And in no way do I think it's going to make us worse. I think it's just going to improve that quality as far as our students are concerned.
Yes, sir. And so today we discussed some ideas, some concepts, some mindsets to have in preparing for your test, and a little bit of running your test. We're going to go a little bit more in depth next time, where we talk about some notes to take at your testing and follow-ups and systems and ways to implement those things that you see at your testing to improve the next round. So we'll do that next time. But that's it for us today. And you can find us, of course, online at MA Teaching Tactics. We're on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and I'm sure I'm missing some. Reddit.
Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram.
All those places. And, of course, we have the actual just audio-only podcasts on anywhere where you can listen to audio-only podcasts at. And that was an awfully odd way to describe what a podcast is, but that's a podcast.
This is why I do this part.
And now we know. Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Kent.